Hey, what's up, guys? Chad here with the Reptile Rangers. Now, we're at the Kernersville Reptile Zoo and Medical Center again today, and we are going to talk about live rat feeders versus frozen thawed rat feeders. Now, this can go into the same concept of using mice and rabbits and guinea pigs and hamsters and gerbils and whatever the case may be. And we may cover those specifically individually at a later date. But this right here, it primarily covers at least what I'm going to show in person with being the rats. But before we get into that, right here in this corner, if you see right down there where I'm pointing, is the subscriber button. If you're on a cell phone, you have to widen the screen, click on the screen widener down in your bottom right hand corner, and then in the bottom in the other corner is the subscriber Reptile Ranger subscriber button. All right, make sure you hit that subscriber button. Make sure you hit the like button, and we appreciate you doing both. All right, now let's get straight into this. Okay, so frozen thawed versus live. Okay, what's the difference? What's good? What's bad about both? Now, actually, there's going to be several things that I'm going to cover here. One, and starting, both have advantages, both have disadvantages when it comes to being feeders. Okay, now let's start by talking about the live food or feeding live prey. Okay, live rats. Live rats are actually healthier than frozen thawed. Okay, understand, whenever you freeze something, you start killing the natural enzymes in it, the natural nutritional content. Frozen animals or frozen thawed feeders are not quite as nutritionally valuable. Doesn't mean that they're bad, they just don't have the full effect of if it was a fresh kill or fresh live prey. Now, live prey does tend to be healthier. And of course, think about it this way. In the insect world, in the lizard world, when we start talking about gut loading things, gut loading your worms, gut loading your dubia roaches, gut loading different things like that, what you can do is you can do that by giving your worms, your roaches, food that you want your animal to eat. If it won't eat it, the bugs eat it, then you feed the bugs to the animal, and the animal gets not only the bug content, but also the fruit and veggie or whatever the case may be content. Now, same applies, okay? Understand that in the case of live prey, if you're feeding your live prey, you're feeding the rat, you're feeding the mouse, you're feeding the whatever, and anything that's still left inside of its stomach that is somewhat undigested or partially digested, then there's still going to be that nutritional content that the animal, the snake, generally speaking, or the tegu, the monitor, whatever the case may be, will typically get as well. Okay. Now, live also is a little bit more convenient because obviously you don't have the thawing out process. You can just take your live rat, you can just toss it right into the cage and allow your animal, primarily your snake, to just go ahead and have at it at free will. Now, there in turn comes some of the disadvantage to the live prey. Yes, in some cases, live prey can turn on the animal. Now, here's the reason why I want to say this, okay? Understand, when a lot of people talk about not doing live prey, they're like, oh man, it's going to chew your snake up if it doesn't eat it, so on and so forth. 9 times out of 10, that is only in the case of very poorly fed feeder animals, especially when it comes to rats. I have never had a problem with any of our snakes getting eaten up or chewed up or anything like that because our rats stay very well fed. However, where I will say some of the times that I have heard of a lot of these cases where the feeder prey went and chewed the pieces out of the snake was when it come to pet store bought feeders, okay? Because they're not fed as often. They may not even be fed a good fatty content or something that's going to allow them to get full. Mice and African soft-furs are a little bit more voracious. They're a little bit more attitude-ish, and they're known to do it more whether they're full or not. But typically just your regular old feeder rat, I can't tell you the countless times that I have thrown one in the midst of feeding multiple different animals, and whether it was breeding rack systems or whatever the case may be, and you're going rack by rack and you're feeding them and end up going back and just watching them, and then all of a sudden forgetting about one and then going back in a few days later, and that rat's on one side of the corner, the snake is on the other side of the tank doing perfectly fine. Okay, I've never had one ever in the hundreds of thousands of snakes that I've had throughout my career in this industry. I have never had one chewed on by a rat. Okay, understand, Now, again, that goes back to, because we have a full rat breeding facility anyways, and so our rats stay very, very well fed, whether in the facility, whether up here before they even get sold to somebody. There's always food available for them, and usually high protein, a good fatty content food. Now, let's talk about the voraciousness of a live feeder, okay? Now, when we get into, of course, when something gets taken, they get bit and wrapped up, it's going to fight back. Ball pythons are stupid in some cases, okay? And even Burmese can be this way. Retics, boas, they can hit them wrong, okay? Or hit them by the butt, grab them by the even by the tail. I seen one do it here in the zoo the other day. It grabbed it by the tail and was pulling it by the tail backwards and then started wrapping it. In those cases, yes, live prey can become a little bit more dangerous. So here in turn, another disadvantage of doing your live prey, because if they do not hit it by the head or the face area and wrap it quickly that way, then the animal can turn around and bite. And in cases of things, like I said, don't forget, in cases of things like mice, even especially rabbits are really bad for this. If you do live rabbit prey, they'll fight back. I mean, of course, anything's going to. It's dying. So it's preservation of life is what it's trying to do. And so just be aware that if you're going to throw live prey in, you should always stand there and watch it to make sure that it hits it correctly. If it does not, then you can kind of stick something in there, whether your snake tongs, whether your hook, whether feeding hemostats, whatever the case may be, in case it doesn't hit it right and the rat does start chewing on your snake. So you can put it in there so it can chew on that object instead of chewing on your animal, okay? Now, again, I'm a proponent for either one. And yes, sometimes I know that kind of sounds cruel. Sometimes it is a little bit cruel, but guess what? It's the way it is in the wild, so, deal with it. They have these kind of issues in the wild. Now, let's go over to frozen thawed, okay? Advantages and disadvantages of frozen thawed. The first key advantage to frozen thawed is you can stockpile, okay? Unless you have a way to keep a lot of rats alive, and understand they grow fairly quickly. So if you buy a certain size, within about 7 to 14 days, they're going to be a totally different size. They're going to be even quite a bit bigger. So with that being said, frozen thawed, you can buy as many as you want at a time. And we sell them by the countless dozens. It allows you to stock up your freezer. Then you don't have to go buy from your pet store, from whatever the case may be. You don't have to go every single week, every 7 days, or every 14 days, whatever your feeding schedule is. You don't have to go get that food as often, okay? Because you don't have to keep it alive. So advantage number one is definitely you can house more in your freezer, in Ziploc bags and, in a deep freeze and whatever it is. You can stockpile so that you don't have to go get them as often. Obvious advantage number one. Disadvantage, like I said, when it comes to the live, is they're not quite as nutritionally sound. All right, disadvantage number two, takes a while for them to thaw out. There's a ton of methods in which you can use to thaw out your frozen thawed. Okay, some people will do a Ziploc bag in boiling water. Some people will do, we have something called a microwave. We don't use it as much anymore as what we used to. We just have too many when we thaw them out. We just have too many. But we used to have one when we didn't have nowhere near the countless amount of snakes that we had now. And we only had we still had a lot, but we only had a few that were taking frozen. Then we would just pop one in the microwave, wrap it up in a paper towel, something like that. Now, granted, you can obviously figure out where this goes in some of the mistakes if it's in there for too long, kind of concept. So another disadvantage. You can do it by heat lamp. You can put a heat lamp over the top of them. You can just set them out, let them come to room temperature, do whatever the case may be that way. Now, understand, frozen thawed, one of the biggest disadvantages of frozen thawed, if it was really, really solid and it gets too thawed out, they'll fall apart in the middle, okay? Because that's where the stomach contents is, where the mushy contents are. And it will cause the skin and the meat and everything to just kind of fall apart. So there is a disadvantage there, and anybody that's ever dealt with this, especially if you've done boiling water or like a microwave or any kind of fast thaw process, like a heat lamp real close to them, it happens, and it's happened to them before. Now, again, another disadvantage with that, of course, is the time that it takes to thaw them out, where the advantage to live, you have it, you get it, you just go toss it in, let them have at it, okay? Now, a disadvantage to the live, and the time being that we're talking about live, is the times when they don't eat. Now, in the case of like when we're talking venomous snakes, Obviously, you can see where the big disadvantage in that comes in, because now you all of a sudden have to go chasing that animal down in a very, in a deadly or a very dangerous animal's tank. So that in turn causes you to have to put hook and hands on the animal by hooking and tailing it, getting it out, putting it in the secure enclosure, chasing the rat down, using snake tongs, long hemostat, something like that while the snake is still in there, which I do not recommend doing because, again, anything, including even in our training course, we got the only training course of its kind on the East Coast. And in the training course, they're always taught you never put your hands inside of what we call go past the threshold or go past the door when the animal is still in there, because when they're inside of their cage, they have more of an advantage of hitting you than you have of getting away from them. Unless you're like one of these idiots on YouTube that people like watching for all their moronic handling techniques. But of course, that's also why they're going to end up as a statistic. So anyways, you can see the obvious disadvantage in certain cases as to why live would be another disadvantage, is because in the times when they don't take it, you now have to go back in there. Now, you're talking a ball python, you're talking something like that, okay, who cares? It's not a big deal. Just reach back in there and take it. If it didn't swing at the rat, it probably ain't going to swing at you, unless it just feels threatened by you for some reason. Now, when we talk about another advantage of the frozen thawed is, of course, going into the ease of being able to just lay the dead rat in there once it's thawed out, lay it in its enclosure, in its tub, and whatever the case may be, and the animal can go over to it as it pleases. You don't have to worry about the rat all of a sudden, or the mouse or the gerbil or whatever going over and attacking your animal. You also, in turn, don't have to worry about when they start taking it, is the animal going to fight back? No, of course it's not. It's dead. So that's another advantage to doing the frozen thawed. Disadvantage, of course, again, comes into the fact of if they do take it down, they're not getting the same nutritional content as they would from live. Now, of course, another advantage, you can just take and pull that thing out, throw it right back in the freezer. You can thaw it and freeze it at least a couple of times before you really need to get rid of it, not do it again. As long as it hasn't been out of the freezer for too terribly long. And again, given most of your reptiles, most of your snakes especially, if they're going to eat, they're going to eat within the first probably 15 to 20 minutes of that thing being thawed out and being in their pen, especially if they know it's there. If they're not going to eat it at that point, then they're generally not going to eat it. So just pull it back out, put it in the freezer, wait till your next appointed feeding day. Okay. Now, again, this is goods and bads, pros versus cons of both live and frozen thawed. And there's proponents of both. There's some people say, no, you should never feed live. Sorry, but in the wild they eat live, okay? They don't always just have something lay down and say, okay, eat me, for all the foolishness there. And then, of course, they don't always have dead, so they have to take live. Sometimes they'll come across something dead and they can take dead. Sometimes they come across the live, they can take the live. But again, I wanted to give you the advantages and disadvantages to both, and understand that, yes, this can apply in the same concept from every kind of live or whole prey, as it were, whole prey type of feeder, from mice to rats to gerbils to hamsters to guinea pigs to rabbits, even things like baby pigs and so on and so forth, for the folks that have the giant snakes like we do that take really large, massive feeder preys. Okay, now, hope this has been helpful. Again, this is frozen thawed rats versus live feeder rats, pros and cons to both. Again, this is Chad. We are the Reptile Rangers here at the Kernersville Reptile Zoo and Medical Center. I hope this has been helpful. Make sure to hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the bell for notifications. Our information will be in the description below for any of those that need to get in touch with us. People do it all the time. They're texting me, they're calling, medical questions, what's going on with their animal, how to house it, feed it, things to change up, things to do and not to do, and what's going on here at the zoo. We appreciate you getting in touch with us. Also, feel free to leave a comment. We appreciate you following along week after week after week. We'll either see you here at the zoo or we'll see you on the next episode. Later.